Oh, my head. Auntie? What happened?
You must have nodded off. You certainly weren't knocked out by a panicked monochromatic head who wanted a few more weeks of reprieve from this collab. Literally anything else is more likely than that being the thing that happened.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe it was getting too boring. But how did they end up back here? And as a cartoon, no less.
Well, I mean, isn't it so much more comfortable here in the house? Where there aren't theist zoomers vomiting nonsense everywhere?
Anyways, next one.
Ah, you brought Yanni too? Amazing. Perfect. Alright, where were we?
Oh god, he followed me.
Anyways, next one.
Elephants turned into chewed grass by stones dropped from birds. These are a few of Quran's perfect words.
Alright, this one's referring to Surah Al-Fil verses 1 to 5, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the companions of the elephants? He has sent against them birds in flocks." So the story behind this is that before the birth of the beloved Prophet ﷺ, the Kaaba was owned by the Quraysh tribe, which despite the violent nature of the other Arab tribes, enjoyed peace and good relations with all of the tribes.
So the Quraysh tribe were peaceful and good-natured. I approve. I like peaceful, good-natured folk.
And had an almost sacred status because the site of the Kaaba once had many idols placed there, which were owned by all the Arab tribes. And because of this, Mecca became very wealthy and it enjoyed a lot of economic activities from all the tribes coming there and back to worship the idols. It even became a common stop for travelers. Now there was this king of Yemen called Abraha who saw this. He saw how much economic activity Mecca enjoyed and he got very jealous. So he built his own Kaaba to try and have similar economic activity in his own city. And of course the Arabs didn't like that. They took it as a joke. Some people even went and ransacked the place.
I was optimistic at the beginning of the story, but as you went on, I can't help but notice that, ransacking isn't really peaceful or good-natured. Granted, maybe you're just working from a more lenient standard in regards to what constitutes peacefulness and good-naturedness. I mean, you'd certainly not be the first person I've met who had less stringent standards than I do in regards to such things, especially in regards to one's own in-group, and especially if that in-group happens to be Islam. Now, you say the Arabs took the establishment of this second Kaaba as a joke, but per your telling of the story, it seems more likely to me that they saw it as economic competition. The Kaaba was a source of revenue for Mecca. Mecca wanted to maintain its monopoly on Kaabas, and so when someone tried to establish a new Kaaba, Mecca violently interfered with it.
So Abraha got very upset and he thought that the best way to divert the economic activity from Mecca to his own city would be to destroy the Kaaba.
This is some top-tier projection. Mecca raids the Yemen Kaaba for competing with them. Yemen retaliates, and then Mecca portrays Yemen as the jealous, greedy invaders.
And of course, because they didn't have bulldozers or wrecking balls at the time, the best thing to use would be elephants. So his army mounted an army of elephants and made their way to the Kaaba. Now, to protect the Kaaba and to show people that you shouldn't mess with the Kaaba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent birds with stones to kill the army. The birds dropped stones on the people on top of the elephants and killed them, leaving them looking like chewed up hay.
Yeah, quite the pacifist that god, isn't he?
Now, the reason why stones were used was because all of the Meccans ran away, because they couldn't kill elephants. Elephants are basically unstoppable.
Unstoppable? Really? What an odd thing to claim. Especially since we have had several battles throughout history where the side without the elephants ended up winning with ease. For example, after Carthago broke the peace agreement with Rome about 200 BC, Scipio recruited soldiers in Sicily, many volunteers, and brought his army to North Africa to fight the Carthaginians, whose army was led by Hannibal. Hannibal back then had 16,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 80 massive armored war elephants. Scipio, on the other hand, had 29,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. During the battle, Hannibal sent the elephants first, of course, but the Romans merely split their formation, let the animals pass, marched again, and continued the fight. Meanwhile, the cavalry ended up taking care of the elephants. Eventually, Scipio surrounded Hannibal's forces completely, and they had to surrender. The losses for the Romans were roughly about 2,500 men, while the Carthaginians lost around 20,000. Quite a difference. After the success against the Carthaginians, the Romans then decided to invade Turkey too. Antiochus III also had about 100 war elephants, which that time around got charged by the Roman cavalry and chased off in fear and terror. Antiochus III roughly lost 50,000 men, and of course the battle. And about 1.5 centuries later, 46 BC, we find ourselves in the midst of the Roman civil wars. Caesar was facing rebellious forces at Thapsus. One of these forces was led by a guy called Quintus Cecilius Metellus Scipio, who had roughly 120 war elephants at his disposal. Unlike the previous times, the elephants didn't get to fight with the cavalry, but instead they were relentlessly targeted by the archers and slingers, before eventually the axemen tried to chop at their legs. The poor animals partly got spooked and fled, partly were injured or killed, but all in all, the outcome was the same. Caesar's 5th Legion easily defeated the enemy, and the elephants which survived were adopted by the Romans as an act of appreciation. So luckily, the poor fellas got a break and a peaceful life after all. Cute! At this point, maybe I should explain why, or rather how, these elephants could be sidetracked and scared off so easily. And it has mostly to do with their origin. They are intelligent animals and they do not want to fight. However, unlike war horses, who are explicitly bred and raised for war situations, war elephants were mostly wild male animals that were captured as adults and broken in. They were born and raised in nature, and so they could easily panic, rebel against the riders, and trample allied forces as they tried to escape. This issue was common enough that the people riding these massive animals often had long knives, chisels, or swords on them, with which they could sever the spinal cord in case the elephants acted out. Just to be clear, elephants were no joke, of course. Meeting a giant animal with bone-crushing feet and a snake-like nose, leather-thick skin, and massive tusks in battle was very, very intimidating. However, they were neither invincible, nor did they necessarily have to be killed to stop them. In fact, most of them didn't want to fight in the first place. Of course, by the time Muhammad came around, people already had several centuries worth of war experience with elephants, which frankly makes this miracle borderline bizarre. I mean, in order for these elephants to even reach the Kaaba, that hyper-wealthy city had to have had utterly incompetent architects, who apparently didn't come up with the idea to build a proper city wall. And they had to have had equally incompetent fighters, or at least leaders, who either got their job from nepotism or DEI or other suspicious means, because experience, knowledge and bravery clearly were not on the job description.
Using birds was also more supernatural. It made people even more scared of messing with the Kaaba, because it had unknown supernatural consequences.
I mean, birds dropping rocks itself is not all that uncommon. Crows, ravens, vultures and eagles, for example, occasionally drop rocks on food to crack it open, although sometimes their interpretation of food might be a bit creative. But what I'm far more interested in is this elephant's turn to chew grass part. I would hate to ignore the elephant in the room, to be honest. Or in the battlefield, in this case. The way you say it, it nearly sounds as though you're claiming the birds and the rocks turned the elephant to mush, which would make them as flat as chewed grass, basically. And you just throw that out there, not giving it a second thought, waving it off as a miracle, and there you go. That's it. Whereas to me, the very first thing that pops into my mind when I hear this is, how the fuck would that elephant not move after the first few rocks have been thrown at it? And how would you be able to see anything flat with all the bloody rocks in the way? Let me show you what I mean. First, we need to figure out what it takes to flatten an elephant. Preferably to 1/4 of an inch or a centimeter to get somewhat close to chewed grass level. Now, as mentioned before, the elephants used in that area were usually male African bush elephants, which means they were massive. These animals weigh a staggering 7,000 kilograms, and for the US, that's about 15,500 pounds. However, I want to be as fair as I can possibly be and make it as easy as possible for Allah and his little birdies. And so I'm gonna go with an Asian elephant of 4.5 kilograms in this calculation. Now, to squish our poor little Dumbo, we would need his volume.
Iseth, it's Dumbo. Dumbo is the elephant.
Which is kind of hard to get, because I don't expect to dissect an elephant, never mind calculate his density anytime soon. So instead, we'll ignore the bones mostly and just use the density of water. Close enough. Pure water has a density of a gram per cubic centimeter, or 1000 kilogram per cubic meter, at 4 degrees Celsius. So, the formula is as follows. Dumbo's volume is his weight divided by the density, which in our case is approximately 4.5 cubic meters.
Iseth, it's Dumbo, not Dumbo. Iseth, please, the audience is gonna figure out you're foreign.
And then we have to squish that volume from its average 3 meter height all the way down to a centimeter, or a third of an inch. And the formula to figure out that goes as follows. The energy to squish the elephant equals the force times the displacement. Unfortunately, it's hard to establish that force, because for very good and humane reasons, no one was eager to squish poor Dumbo and measure the pressure of the elephant's body fighting back. So again, all we can do is make assumptions. In this case, we could maybe be a bit lenient and say 1000 kilopascal, which is about 10 times the atmospheric pressure. It's a decent approximation if you don't include those big elephanty bones, but again, it's really hard to tell if we're anywhere close. And so even if we went with 1000 kilopascal for an Asian elephant, the amount of force it would take is enormous. It would range all the way from the higher megajoules into the gigajoules, which is over 1,000,000 joules, mind you. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, if you have an apple drop on your head from a branch that's about 3 feet above you, that is approximately 1 joule. You would need that times 1,000,000 to get that kind of force. Are you slowly seeing why dropping enough rocks on an elephant to get him flat might be a slight bit of an issue? But let's go on, because I also checked the birds. I looked at pictures of Mecca and I went for the first bird that I saw there, which was a pigeon. I've scoured the internet to find the average weight of that bird, and the estimate ranged from 100 gram all the way up to 400 gram. Neither of which seemed very accurate, since 100 gram seems to be borderline anorexic, while a near 1 pound heavy pigeon probably lives in the bin of a fast food restaurant. So eventually I just threw my hands in the air and settled for 250 grams. Close enough. Why did I need that? Well, because a pigeon can carry on average 10 to 13% of its weight on its back. We know that from pigeons that carry letters around. And so I suspected that if it can carry that much on its back, it also can carry at least 10% of its own weight in its claws. I don't know if I give the birds too much credit or not credit enough, but it's an easy, nice round number, so why not? 10% of 250 grams is of course 25 grams, and so we're talking about 25 gram heavy rocks. Now, if you drop a 25 gram rock from a height of, let's say, 10 meters, which is around give or take 33 feet, you get at best 2.45 joules. In other words, you would need hundreds of thousands of birds, millions of rocks, and quite frankly, I wouldn't want to be the guy who has to clean up after them. Because I bet the entire place would be a lake of pebbles and bird poop. But hey, maybe the rocks were so nicely flat in the end that they looked like chewed up grass. And maybe they stunk like it too. Anyway, regardless of how realistic or unrealistic you consider the story, Yanni's take doesn't falsify Satan's claim about what's in the Quran. To the contrary, it corroborates it.
This is of course another miracle which relies on the existence of God, so you can't use this as an argument against Islam.
Couldn't that have been the entirety of your rebuttal? You didn't need to include the backstory about the economic situation between Yemen and Mecca. You could have just said, it's a miracle. What, does that seem too insubstantial of an answer when it stands alone, so you had to add some lore as scaffolding for your argument?
Which relies on the existence of God, so you can't use this as an argument against Islam.
In fact, I can use miracles as evidence against Islam. Islam purports a God that is willing and able to provide evidence of himself in the form of miracles, yet has not done so for billions of people or for hundreds of years. There's an inconsistency between the supposed behavior of your god in the past and the supposed behavior of your god now. Now, this argument isn't philosophically airtight. I can conceive of a god that behaves erratically or arbitrarily, but that's not how I'd expect him to behave based on Islam's descriptions of him. If you want more logically robust reasons to disbelieve in the Islamic God, you can consider the contradictions that arise when he is purported to be both omnipotent and omniscient. I didn't have a good segue for that point when you brought it up before, so I'm going to shoehorn it in now. Also, can I just say, your God's miracles suck ass? Like, pulling together dead poultry and pummeling elephants with rocks? Is this really the behavior we would expect from an all-powerful deity?
Millennia-old man at the time of the flood.
So here Satan is talking about Nuh alayhi salam,
Why did your shirt suddenly change color?
who, according to the Quran, chapter 29 verse 14, gave dawah for 1,000 years take 50 or 950 years, and it's presumed that he lived for a bit longer than this. And honestly, there isn't much to say about this. I mean, it's just another miracle.
This is quite the recurring theme, isn't it? So far, you acknowledged that nearly all the issues Sai points out are in fact in the Quran. Maybe you disagree about the odd word here and there, but that's about it. You don't argue that the bird pieces didn't return. You don't argue that the moon didn't get split. You don't argue that the elephants didn't get grasped by birds. And you don't argue that the dude was over 1,000 years old, give or take. You just argue that Sai has no reason to ridicule these things. Because miracles. Well, let's take your argument seriously for a moment and apply it consistently. Oh, this is gonna be fun. A while ago, my kid lost her tooth, and she put it under the pillow. And then, the morning after, she found a nice, cute, squishy toy under her pillow instead of her tooth. Clearly, that was a tooth fairy miracle. Of course, you could argue that that's very implausible and that it's far more likely that I would have exchanged the tooth for a toy. But you see, that is not a valid argument against the tooth fairy, because clearly it was a miracle. Or how about this one? Every Christmas night, a dude flies around in a sleigh and leaves gifts for the kids. It is such an esteemed event that the US military itself tracks Santa's flight route. Now, you could say that that's not real, and that a single guy can't fly across the world within one night with flying reindeers, especially because reindeers don't fly, but that is not a valid argument, because of course it would be a miracle, a Santa miracle. And quite frankly, if it wasn't a miracle, you'd have to believe that there is a worldwide conspiracy of parents that are lying to their own kids and stuffing gifts and toys under the tree in unison to hide the absence of an imaginary Santa. I'm sorry, but that's ridiculous. That's the wackiest conspiracy theory I've ever heard. If that kind of conspiracy was true, it would be found out so fast. Trust me, you hardly get a group of 10 to keep a secret. How the hell would you manage to get millions to keep a secret like that? No chance. None. Clearly we're talking about miracles here. The Santa and the Tooth Fairy. Would you accept these miracles, Yanni? Would you? Probably not. And yet I bet that all I would have to change to make you take them seriously was to find passages about Santa's flying reindeers inside your Quran. If an argument only works if applied to one's favorite source of authority, then that is not a valid argument, but a blatant case of special pleading and double standards.
And as I've been saying earlier, using a miracle to criticize a religion doesn't make much sense.
Why? Why shouldn't we look at miracles? Why wouldn't we want to establish whether or not there is evidence for them? Who are you to tell me that I can't look at them to see if I can figure them out? Imagine me telling you that I have developed an absolutely impeccable anti-cancer medicine. However, you are not allowed to test or research it because you don't believe in the sacred method of iodine fertilization. What sort of nonsense would that be? I'm sorry, but just because it's hard for an apologist to counter people's critique of his holy book's fancy tales, doesn't mean that these people are wrong to do so.
Because if God exists and he is all-powerful, he can cause this miracle to happen. So if you want to criticize a religion, you don't look at the miracles, you look at something like, I don't know, theology or prophecies.
Right, you've been beating this dead horse for a while. It's central to most of your rebuttals. I feel as though I need to give this a little more time and explain something. Islam is not distinct from its miracle claims. The miracle claims are a component of what Islam is. So if you disbelieve in the miracle claims, you are disbelieving in at least that aspect of Islam, and you should disbelieve the miracle claims. And I suspect you would agree with me in regards to miracles that are not Islamic. When it comes to any claim, my demand for evidence scales with my perceived outlandishness of the claim. And miracles, as you would agree, are among the most outlandish kind of claim. The kind that only happen once and don't leave a trace. Miracles are insufficiently substantiated. Your religion claims miracles. Therefore, your religion is insufficiently substantiated. That is a valid criticism of your religion and a valid reason to not believe it.
Your body was fashioned from one clot of blood.
So here Satan is referring to chapter 23 verse 14 of the Quran.
No, Satan clearly is referring to chapter 91 verse 2, which has absolutely nothing to do with the actual verse that he meant to cite, by the way, because it says the following. And the moon as it follows it. That's it. That's the verse. It is part of a sentence that, quite frankly, makes no sense on its own, but somehow that's common for Quran verses, for some reason. You know, perfect book and all. In context, however, the verse is talking about the moon following the sun, which is a whole different can of worms, if you ask me. But one way or another, it is not the verse Sai meant to cite. The verse he was actually referring to is chapter 96, verse 2, which merely says, created human from a clinging clot. And yes, that verse doesn't make much sense either until you add verse 1 to it. Together it says, read, O prophet, in the name of your Lord, who created humans from a clinging clot. And honestly, I'm a tiny bit cheating and steelmanning the Quran here, because the actual verse, as I found it, went like this. Read, O prophet, in the name of your Lord, who created humans from a clinging clot. And at first I thought that was a typo or something, but then I found it several times over on several different sites, who all translated it the same way. So it clearly is meant to be there. Allah clearly double created us, for some reason. Who knows, maybe the first time he messed it up and so he just had to try another time. Anyway, even in context, there is not much more to the verse. All it says is that we are created from a sticky clot of blood, which conveniently was already there for some inexplicable reason. What Satan doesn't refer to is chapter 23, verse 14, the verse that Yanni tries to defend. Isn't it kind of fascinating that there is two verses about blood goop that need defending rather than just one? This is wild, I swear. This book is getting wilder and wilder by the minute.
Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot, and we made the clot into a lump, and so on.
Let me guess. It's a miracle! Yeah?
So, the criticism here is that apparently this clinging clot is referring to a clot of blood. And this isn't entirely accurate, because the Arabic word used here is alaqatan, which can mean congealed clot. But like many other Arabic words, it can have several translations. So one of them is a piece of congealed blood, but it's also translated as something that sticks to something else, and it's also translated into a leech. In fact, alaqat is the main word used for leech in Arabic, even today. So the truth is that in the womb, the embryo does indeed stick to something. It sticks to the lining of the uterus about 6 days after fertilization.
Aha. So it's either a coagulated claw, which it isn't, or a clot of blood, which it isn't, or it's sticky goop, which it isn't, or it's a leech, which it definitely isn't. I mean, even if you squint as if you've eaten too many fermented dates and interpret your unborn offspring as a parasite and a scourge to your bodily autonomy, you would still not get a leech out of it. And I dare you to tell me that a 6 days old blastocyst looks like a glorified short worm. rather than, a microscopic sphere. Now, you could argue that the verse is not really scientific, but metaphorical, but then it wouldn't be special, because its specialness is derived by the scientific accuracy of the Quran. So instead, what poor Yanni has to go for is for the verse being accurate, but mistranslated. Which, given the alternative translations, makes it not just a special claim, but an extra special claim. The kind of extra special that gets to sit on the short bus, in fact.
Not only that, but around this time also the embryo becomes leech-shaped, as shown by this image. So instead of clinging clot, some people do translate it as leech-like substance.
Holy shit, I'm getting Pendleton flashbacks.
Now the thing I want to show you next is which, in my opinion, is God's favorite animal to make fun of the evolutionists. Do you know which one it is? That's right. The platypus duckbill. He has a bill like a duck, but it's fleshy.
In other words, not at all like a duck. It's just a big nose. The mouth is underneath it.
Exterior fur like a bear.
Fur or hair like all mammals.
Interior fur like a sheep.
Underfur, which is seen in many marine mammals.
Lays eggs like reptiles and birds.
Lays eggs like monotremes, because it is one.
Is nocturnal like an owl.
Give me a fucking break. Do you know how many mammals are nocturnal?
Walks like a reptile.
I'm assuming you mean because its legs stick out to the sides. Once again, it's an early branch of mammal.
Clucks like a hen. Eats meat like a fish.
I eat meat like a fish.
Has webbed feet and is aquatic like an otter.
Semi-aquatic mammals tend to have webbed feet.
Uses sonar like the dolphins.
Yeah, I'm sure platypus echolocation would be really fun to discuss if it existed.
Has claws like a rooster.
It has claws like mammals and reptiles.
Its eggs like those of a tortoise.
Its eggs are more or less like those of a reptile because it's a monotreme.
It's able to detect electrical impulses.
Monotremes have free nerve endings in their snouts, which can detect electrical
The
signals.
living ones are just like their fossils.
Well, yeah, otherwise they wouldn't be their fossils.
What is it? Platypus duckbill. Where did it come from? Parents, platypus duckbills. What will it be? The platypus.
Duckbill?
Alright, let's take this easy, Yanni. This is not what a 6-day-old blastocyst looks like. This is what it looks like. It is not really all that leech-shaped, is it? Don't get me wrong, it will look like a glorified goopy peanut eventually, but that is at least 2 weeks later.
So instead of clinging clot, some people do translate it as leech-like substance, because that is exactly what it is.
So an embryo superficially looks like a leech, so we are accurate in calling it a leech. I feel like we're doing some pretty generous linguistic rounding here.
Some people do translate it as leech-like substance, because that is exactly what it is, and it fits perfectly with science and the original Arabic word.
I mean, it fits perfectly with your lack of understanding of science, but unfortunately that is where it ends. No, a 6-day-old blastocyst that nests into the uterus is not the same as a 23-day-old embryo. And it won't be that no matter how many spoons of nutmeg you shovel down your esophagus. And unless the word alaka suddenly magically also means spherical-looking cell hive, I have very little hope for your Quranic verses accuracy. Or the state of the British school system, for that matter. Auntie? You okay?
No, I think I'm gonna be sick.
Man, you look horrible. I'm sorry. Was that embryo talk a bit too graphic, maybe?
No, you brought up the British school system.
Right. Well, I think Auntie needs a bit of a recovery time. Yeah. So, while we deal with that, thank you all for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like, share and subscribe, and have a great evening.